Hi, I'm Oz here with the Hiby R6 in for a review. Now I've already unboxed this, so if you'll see a little card appear up where my thumb is. If you click on that, you can check out the unboxing. But now I'd just like to get into the hardware itself and how the software performs and how it sounds. So first of all, a quick overview. This is the first, well, I suppose the first Chinese DAP, at least especially in this price range, that uses a Qualcomm Snapdragon multi-core processor. And so that makes it pretty fast. And the last DAP we saw that had that was the Astalon kernel, the S&P 1000, which is very expensive. This is down in the kind of $500 to $600 range, depending on whether you get an aluminium or steel case. And well, for the kind of specs they're offering, it looks like it's going to be pretty good value. A quick overview of the surround. You have a USB 3 port and Qualcomm Quick Charge 3, so it charges, I think it was 70% in 70 minutes, so it's a pretty fast charging DAP. It has a funky power button which shows a different color depending on what resolution the file is being played. It has playback controls as usual, and your volume controls, and a single micro SD card slot. Now, I thought, no, gee, I wish it had double, and a lot of people said that. But in the end, when I first got a DAP, the first one was a FIO X5 in for a review. That had 2 slots, and I think the largest card you could get without paying an arm and a leg was a 64 gig card. And since 400 gigs is about the largest you can get now, that's equivalent to what, something like 4 times what you could get before into one slot. So I think probably maybe 2 slots are maybe unnecessary. It does have 32 gigabytes of onboard memory, which isn't that much, but it does have 3 gigabytes of RAM, so you won't have issues like I had of say the original X7 where it ran out of memory. Anyhow, it has your usual balanced output here, and again, I wish that this was the new 4.4mm Pentacon standard. That would have been far better, but it does have the standard 3.5mm and a line-out/coax in the manner of FIO. And unfortunately no optical, which would have made it perfect. Now it has aptX in there. I don't know if mine actually has with this firmware aptX, but it will, I guess, at some point this year if it doesn't. All the same, you can also use it as a USB DAC, or you can use it as a transport to other USB components out here, for which it has software that can directly access, say, the USB device, so you can get a direct connection and bypass the Android interface. And speaking of Android, it uses Android 6. And I won't go into detail. If you've seen Android, you've seen Android, but the core components are, of course, Hiby Music, and you've got your Play Store installed by default. Now, I put Tidal on here too, because that's where I get have a lot of my music, and Tidal offline mode is very handy. Now, I'll go quickly just through the settings. The one relevant setting is the audio settings. Now, you have the same setting whether you can have the line out be SPDIF or line out, but like the FIO, the X7. You also have these filters here, a low pass anti-aliasing filter setting, and don't worry if you don't know technically much about that. I remember a manufacturer had a bunch of filter settings on one of their DACs, and they asked their employees all to listen and see who could hear a difference, and about 50% could and 50% could not. Anyway, for those people who care, you have minimum phase, you have a fast roll-off and slow roll-off, and you might notice a difference with that, you might not. That's not really a huge deal, but I guess that's built into the Sabre DACs that are in here. The gain, of course, high or low. Channel balance, the usual kind of thing for people who need it. Tonality was an interesting one. Now, I'll talk about the sound later, but the general sound of this is much like FIO's X7 in that it's designed to be neutral, more aimed towards good measurements. And the sound quality is good, which is one of the reasons I'm reviewing it. But for people who want just a little bit of a warmer sound signature, they have included these settings, and they didn't make any significant difference. I mean, if I switched from reference, which is the stock, to warm through to tube amp, it was very hard to notice any difference until I went from tube amp all the way back to reference, and then I noticed the mid-range come a bit forward. So I guess warm gives it a very, very subtle bass tilt, and tube amp would give a very subtle V-shaped signature to it. So in the end, my review is based on the reference essentially, but I'll get into the sound later. So that being done, the main thing is Hiby Music, and that's where everything will revolve around. There's no special mode just to launch straight into Hiby Music. You have all the other options there, And I think some of the aspects of being able to launch directly into or have the whole system or the interface based around the music app has been somewhat negated by some of the setup they have here. Inside the app itself, we have usual kind of setup. Hiby has been writing software for other manufacturers, and you'll probably see some similarities. You have two sets of menus at the top, music, and access to things like favorites, recent, and playlists. You have something which is not going to make much the Hiby link, which I don't know anything about yet, and you have the search function as usual. Now, back into music, you have your usual options, title, folder, where I have a nice funky name for my micro SD card, the album, good old album view, and as you can see, with the multi-core processor, it loads album art pretty fast, where there is album art anyway. The artist, of course, that loads out pretty quickly too. Usual genre. Private cloud is very handy if you have a DLNA server or similar. You can load up that, and you also have the option of dragging them into a different order if you want to sort out how you view what order you view those things in. So one of the things I really like about this is, to give it a good example, I have music in multiple formats. So like I'll have an album, let's say Beck. I've got Beck's C change floating around in here somewhere. I wish if I go to the artist and find Beck. I also have one of his albums, the same album, in both standard res, high res, and DSD. And you'll notice a funky little thing, these little labels, which say HR for high res and DSD if it's also DSD. So that means the irritating thing I had with some of the other DAPs I used was I'd go to the album and it would show that, okay, the album has 2 copies, and then I'd have to open each one to check which was the high res and which was the DSD. And this is handy because I can see immediately which track is what, and that means it makes it very easy for me to test whether how the DSD sounds versus the standard res version. So that's something I really like about this user interface, and apart from the fact that it's very snappy. You also have your usual playback screen in here, and we've got Bill Evans playing at the moment. And it has options coming out up the wazoo with things you can do. It's got the playlist itself. You have your repeat option up here. There are other options. There are menus hiding everywhere, and I can never remember where half the stuff is. But to that convenience, there is actually where we need to jump to next, which is into the settings. And if you tap on Quick Guide, it'll tell you where everything is. Like, I always forget that there's hold down to show options on all the music tracks, which I don't use much, but all this stuff, it shows you where everything is, and literally I forget half this stuff half the time. The interesting thing I didn't show you was again, Hiby Link. I guess they have or are going to create a system, much like Astel and Kern, to have some kind of interaction with other components. I don't know anything about that. Likewise, I don't know anything about the Hiby Music user login system. It suggests there might be music to download because there's Download Manager here. So again, that's something we'll have to explore in maybe a future video. Music scan is self-explanatory. You can either scan the whole system or just scan a particular folder if you just added one folder and don't want to wait for it to scan thousands of files. Equalizer, it's your standard fare using doubles. We'll start from this end. 16K, 842, 1K, 500. Any weird thing around here is it says 31 and 62 instead of 32 and 64. But, oh well, whatever. Anyhow, it's your standard equalizer. The interesting thing is, if you don't know anything about EQing and you don't know exactly how you want to go about adjusting the sound to your liking, if you do want to try EQing, they have a thing called Mage Sound 8-Ball. Every time I see this, I keep thinking Magic 8-Ball, but this is not Magic 8-Ball, it's Mage Sound. Now, this, if you switch it on, allows you to adjust a number of preset parameters, and you can see, you get an idea pretty much by reading the screen. Cool bright versus warm dark, or bass extension, deep or light, bass texture. I mean, if you jack all these things over here, you suddenly get a very warm and mushy sound, for example. And if you do play with it, you can easily reset it to 0. Now, I was scrolling down here and looking at other things. Sibilance, yes, okay. Female overtones, vivid or detox. Let's detox our females. Let's not go there. That's a bit of an unexpected one, but anyway. Strange, unexpected things aside, that was certainly a very handy thing to play with. And it does what it says it does. I mean, if you turn down the sibilance, obviously it's knocking down something around, say, the 6 to 8K zone and dropping sibilance down. The other interesting thing are the plugins. Now, do you remember my friend Joe who I mentioned in the unboxing video? Well, he's got his sound field enhancement thing here. And that, if you're thinking, is that one of those funky 3D sound buttons that like you get on some DAP amps and some headphones? Yes, it does. Makes everything sound more spacious. So that's basically what that does. And as usual, you have your sleep timer. This is version 1.1 beta of the software, which has worked pretty well actually. The settings always have useful info, as we know. Show lyrics, pause when headphone is unplugged. That's a first I really like. Track transitions, now they're a little bit more advanced than just gapless, whether you have a fade in or fade out or just the irregular insert silence. And replay gain, whether you want that by track or by album, that will of course make the output not bit perfect. And replay from last position, if the software exited cleanly, you didn't crash or you didn't hard shut off the player, then it should resume from playing where it was before. Driving friendly mode, this is something you're going to have to read my description about. I didn't work out what this was. I don't know what that adjusts in particular, so I will investigate that because I have no information. Show lock screen obviously shows the lock screen. Play through folders, if you come to the end of one folder, it will play through the next. But wait, there's more. Exclusive high quality USB audio access. So if you're having something like, a lot of people might consider using one of these as a transport to a, say, Chord Hugo 2, which I will. In that case, you want direct USB, high quality USB audio access. You don't want to go through the Android system for best results. Lock USB audio volume, obviously if you don't want to have this is to fix issues with DSD and what have you, or lock the hardware volume. Fixed output sampling rate. This, as again per the help, if you have a device where you have a limit to how high res it can accept stuff like, say, a DAC with 96K input, you can actually lock the output. The volume mode, well, that depends on the device being connected, but I guess whether or not, I guess it's like Audivana Plus, and you have the option of using the volume, digital volume on here, or just having the output fixed. Okay, and the language setting, if you want to know what languages are supported, pause the video now and have a read. Anyhow, error report. This is a cool thing. Now, have you ever gone with the manufacturer and said your software has screwed up and did blah, 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 and they have no idea what's going on and can't reproduce it? Well, if you tap this, it generates an error report in a particular folder, and then you send it to service@hiby.com with a description of the problem, and they tell you what, and they'll hopefully be able to figure out what broke. So that's the settings. And as far as the music app goes, well, apart from being straightforward, it's nice and fast. It scrolls really fast and behaves pretty well. There are only kind of minor things that I'm not a big fan of. While it's paused, I wish I could actually scroll forward into the music, but it won't let me, or back. You actually have to be playing, and then it will... Oh, well, then it jumped. Okay, well, as far as software goes, for me, it has only been a very tiny bit glitchy. This was the only thing I could get to glitch, was scrolling through tracks. And it's not something I haven't had other DAPs glitch, so I'm not particularly stressed about it. Other than that, it has behaved really well between playing back DSD and normal files without clicking, popping, and causing general anarchy. And that's been really fantastic. I have had the occasional weird glitch come up, and I don't know if I can get it to happen here. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I don't know where this came from. I think it's some Hiby music thing, and I don't know what I had to scroll up to get it. But this is obviously not my music, as I don't listen to Alice in Wonderland or kids stuff. So I don't know where this stuff has came from, and I guess it's coming from online because it's obviously not on the player. And it has this disabled thing here. Anyway, I have no idea what this is about, but there's obviously something in here that was hidden. And... But obviously there's some interesting features here, like the Hiby music. I don't know how that's going to work or what it's about. But otherwise, in terms of usage, it's generally been glitch-free. But note that these are only in the hands of a few reviewers, and we probably haven't found even a fraction of any bugs that are out there. So once they get into everyone's hands and people start finding bugs and what have you, stuff will come up like they did with the FIO players. But, that will be fixed, I guess, in the future as they update the software. So I used the R6 with a number of IEMs and full-sized headphones to get an idea of its sound quality and compared it to a number of DAPs I have on hand. For example, I have here Campfire Audio's Andromedas and Ultimate Ears Reference Remastered, and of course the Roxans, which I just recently reviewed. I just ignore the fact that I have a single-ended plug on here at the moment. I do have a balanced cable for it, which I could use with the R6. Now, speaking of that, there's one issue that the R6 has, which is going to be significant for a lot of people. The output impedance of the headphone sockets is 10 ohms. Now, for some people, that's going to be a big showstopper, and for those who don't understand why that's important, now the things like these multiple balanced armature IEMs that I have here, they will not have a flat impedance curve. So depending on the different drivers may have a different impedance. So through the low range it could be very low, and through the high range it could be very high. And if somewhere in the range that it gets close enough to the output impedance of the device you're using it with, you will get a shift in the frequency response of the IEMs. And for example, the Campfire Audio Andrometers, they're very sensitive IEMs, and they have a very non-flat impedance, and out of my iPhone 6 you do get a drop off in bass. Now the advantage of course of a higher output impedance is lower noise, but that's of course negated by the frequency shift. So for the while the Ultimate is reference remastered, and the Roxans, they were actually okay. Surprisingly, they didn't get any frequency shift. Even the Laylas didn't, which was kind of unexpected. The Andrometers definitely did. They sounded brighter. Now, it wasn't such a big issue. I could just change the tips from these spiral dots, which make them sound brighter, down to some foamies, which were a bit darker sounding. But other people with balanced armature or multiple balanced armature IEMs or multiple driver IEMs especially, may have some issues. And some people have already decided they're not going to buy this. Now, this could be significant for the company, because Astral and Kern, when they released the original AK100, that had a very high output impedance, and people just stopped buying it once they knew about the output impedance. So that could be a significant thing. Another thing that is in the settings, which I showed before, was the ability to shift the tonality of the DAP very slightly. Now, I did all my listening primarily with reference, and any of my evaluation of this is going to be with the reference tonality. Now, of course, the warm and tube amp are only very subtly different. I like the tube amp presentation. I don't know how exactly that affects the sound, but usually tube amp refers to a very slight V shape in the sound, and noticeable when I switched back to reference as the vocals came a little bit more forward. But again, my entire review will be just on the reference and the default setting. Now, of that sound, the overall presentation was kind of very clean, very clear, very forward. And somebody already asked me that if they're looking for a warm-sounding player, should I buy the Hiby? And the answer is no, it's not a warm-sounding player. It's more along the lines of FiO's X7 or X7 Mark II. It's a very by-the-numbers kind of presentation, very clean, very clear, very even, very low distortion, and that was their focus. It's in comparison with other DAPs where this particular sound is very noticeable. For example, one of the DAPs, probably one of my favorite examples of a good sounding DAP is the good old Calyx M. And the Calyx M, and it has a very warm presentation in comparison to the R6. I always thought it was just slightly sweet of neutral, but it sounded very warm going from one to the other. Really, a really big difference. Now, of course, the R6 has the advantage that it has a much faster user interface. This one is particularly slow, as you can see. Scrolling is particularly sluggish compared to the scrolling of the good old R6, which is extremely fast, having a fast processor. But of my favorite sounds, the Calyx M is great, but it's also a big bulky DAP as well, even if it does have good headphone drive and something of a shorter battery life. Now, the battery life you could get out of the R6 was considerably longer, and you can get something like people have tested up to 10 hours using IEMs or playing high res, and probably reduce it down to about 5. I haven't tried DSD as such. It probably is going to be a bit shorter still because it uses the most processing power, but it does a really good job. Now, of everything I used, another DAP I used was the AK380, and this is a really good example. Over 5 times the price. You expect the sound quality to be better. Now, you can see what I'm playing here. It's Friday Night in San Francisco, and if you haven't heard this album, you should check it out. It's probably one of the greatest guitar albums in history. 3 of the great guitar players, close mic'd, really excellent recording, absolute fantastic levels of detail and speed. It tests everything about equipment, and except maybe bass response. But out of the AK380, there was obviously, even with the IEMs and full-sized headphones, definitely an improvement. It sounded more relaxed and detailed, and more realistic presentation, whereas the R6 sounds kind of more up front, more in your face, but still very good. I mean, if you didn't do the comparison, you wouldn't really notice much of a difference. Now, on ordinary music, if you're coming back down to earth, I'm not listening to super high quality recordings, with some mainstream music that I like, kind of more regular stuff, the difference is kind of negated by how, by the quality of the recordings not being so great. And the R6 is excellent in that regard. It's probably closest in comparison to something like Fio's X7 Mark II, which regrettably I could not compare because the person where I'm sharing a loaner with somebody else who has been slow returning it back to me for review. Anyhow, of course, the difference between the X7 and the R6 is that the X7 has multiple amp modules. Speaking of the amp modules, the X7 Mark II has... The original X7 had, the quality of the amp modules versus the quality of the DAC itself was fairly even. It wasn't improved by using an external amp. Whereas the X7 Mark II, the increase in quality of the DAC section has, means that with an external amp it sounds better. So I also decided to try the R6 with an external amp, and one example is, the Ayla Audio's Continental V5. It's actually a hybrid amp. It uses a tube for gain rather than an op amp, and then it uses a similar output headphone driving chip as the Hiby R6. Now, it's a very detailed amp all the same, and I did notice a little bit of improvement using this and say using my Pico Power, which I also have floating around on my desk somewhere. This you could improve the output quality with headphones a little bit, but not significantly enough that I'd go out and pay hundreds of dollars for an amp just to make a big chunky stack. I think a lot of people are interested in just buying the R6 and using that as their singular device. So to that end, I drove Focal's Utopias with it. Now the Utopias I find to be extremely revealing of amp quality, DAC quality, everything. And I expected, as I did with the original X7, that I wouldn't like the combination. But the low distortion numbers, it wasn't, of course, as relaxed and high-end sounding as I can get out of, say, a Hugo 2 or one of the big amps I have here or the like. But the sound quality was still excellent and still extremely listenable. And again, it's one of those things, if you don't compare, you won't notice. And speaking of that, one of the maybe a common question you might get asked is how does it sound compared to Chord's Mojo? And the Mojo, somewhat like the Calyx M, but different in its own way, sounds more relaxed, warm and natural than the R6. If you're very picky on your instrument quality, the Mojo is going to sound a little bit nicer and a little bit easier. But on its own, the R6 did a fantastic job. And considering it's $500 to $600, I think the sound quality is very good. It's definitely up there. And it's enough that for most people, I reckon they won't benefit from it if spending a lot of money on big stacking stuff together, or buying really, really expensive DAPs such as like the AK380 I just showed. I think for most stuff it's going to be excellent. I think that's the primary thing with the R6 is that, whether you're using full-sized headphones, it's not going to drive big planers with any, big drama, but it's primarily, and I think it's primarily for people who want a good portable DAP, it's going to be pretty good. And of course, the disadvantage is if you do have IEMs which have multiple balanced armatures, it is going to be a bit of a lottery, and that's going to be the tricky thing. Does one take that chance? For me, where it would be a good DAP is if I was looking for a transport to use with my Hugo 2, this would be fantastic. The only thing it's lacking for me in that is it doesn't have optical output, which might be ideal in some circumstances. So for me, the R6 is almost there. So this fantastically fast multi-core interface, which is very fast and very responsive, plays DSD files instantly. Unlike even my AK380 here, the AK380, it takes a few seconds before DSD files start up playing. This is almost perfect. It's got aptX, will have aptX in an update, I'm not sure. It has pretty good headphone drive. The 10 ohm output impedance, if it was down near 1 to 2 ohms or something like that, that would be so much better. If it had, the new Pentacon plug instead of these awful 2.5mm sockets, that would be excellent too. It's something we need to get manufacturers switching over to. It's really, really so close to being excellent, but considering it's only $500 to $600, it's still an excellent DAP in that regard. So I hope that gives you a clear overview of how the Hiby performs. Thanks again to Joe for letting me review this DAP. And thanks once again to my patrons for helping me make these videos. Did you know that by becoming a patron, you can actually get to see some of the videos and cuts I make in advance, behind the scenes footage, and you can chat to me and email me directly for advice and information. To become a patron, head over to patreon.com/Currawong, or head over to my site here.reviews, or HEAR.reviews, and click on the link in the sidebar. Also, if you'd like to support me in other ways, there are links in the sidebar on my site where if you purchase headphones through those links, I get a couple of dollars, and that helps me make these videos. Anyway, thanks once again for watching, and I'll see you online.